Hey guys, welcome back. It's Rhett Thompson, and today I'm here with my buddy Wyatt, and we're looking at whether you should adapt lenses onto your GH5 or whether you should go with a more native lens approach using lenses from Panasonic and Olympus. So guys, if you're familiar with my channel, you probably aren't going to be surprised to find out that I'm pretty much a Panasonic fanboy. I really like a lot of the stuff they do, a lot of the lenses they put out, and I pretty much only own native lenses at this point.
Hi guys, I'm Wyatt Fecht, a freelancer down in St. Louis, Missouri. Like Rhett said, I also shoot with the GH5, but I shoot exclusively on Canon EF glass. I've only used native glass a time or two. So I think this will be a real interesting comparison with lots of pros and cons for each. Hopefully you guys learned something. Let's get started.
So first up, the native lenses tend to be a lot smaller. Sometimes they're about the same size, like the Leica 10-25 and the Sigma. They're pretty much the same lens when it comes to the specs, and they're pretty much the same size. However, the telephoto lenses, the 40-150 and the 70-200 from Sigma, I mean, look at these things. This thing is like twice as big and like 3 times as heavy. This is probably the biggest contrast of all the lenses we've got here today. They're both wide angles, they both got pretty fast apertures, but one can fit in your hand and the other one is gonna take up a lot more room in your bag, despite being a pretty equivalent lens. So what is the value of a small lens exactly though? Well, at the end of the day, you've only got so much room in your bag and you've only got so much strength to hold these lenses. So if you're a one-man band, you know, you're shooting by yourself, you don't have a crew, these smaller lenses are really useful for that type of stuff. I know personally, back when I had a smaller bag, or even with my current bag, sometimes I will have to leave a lens or two behind just because it's just a little too big to fit in my bag with all my other gear. And that's always a bummer when you can't take something just because it's too big. If you travel a lot, some of the lenses I take with me most are the smallest ones, not the best ones. So yeah, size is not everything, and not all micro four thirds lenses are the smallest lenses in the world, but they're almost always smaller than their full frame equivalents.
So yes, while the native lenses are generally going to be smaller and lighter, which is fantastic for handheld work, the adapted lenses are generally going to be larger. Now, this one in particular is pretty hefty to carry around if you're having to do handheld work. One of the advantages that adapted lenses are going to have is that you have much larger focus rings and zoom rings. If you can see, we have all of this space to grip down and grab my zoom to change it, or my focus to change it, which when you're shooting and you don't have time to be able to look down closely and line up your hands right, or if you're up on a shoulder rake and really need to get that hand positioning and get that, you know, ring grabbed and changed, it works much better to have, you know, the larger size that an adapted lens is generally going to give you. If you are on a set with a fully rigged out camera that has a matte box, follow focus, all of those accessory pieces, the extra size of the adapted lens is going to fit much better because you're able to get all of that in without it being as cramped when all those extra pieces are already going to be making your rig pretty cramped to begin with. Additionally, when we're talking about having to adjust your zoom or your focus, all EF lenses are going to be true manual focus lenses. They don't have fly-by-wire. So when you are changing your focus, when you stop, your focus stops moving, which is much preferable whenever you're having to, you know, go from a hard stop to a hard stop on a focus pull. So if we're comparing these two lenses, which are going to give you the same focal length, this one is going to be much lighter, much more bearable for shooting with all day. However, if you have to pull focus, you're going to want this one, which has the large focus ring that you can really get a good grip on and really be able to manipulate easily without having to worry about your finger slipping, or even in this instance, sliding in front of your shot. Now, talking about the size of this Sigma, if you show up to a set with this and you have a client there, they're going to be, and this is sad to say, much more impressed by you showing up with a big, impressive looking lens like this than some tiny, lightweight one. Now, it might be the exact same quality of lens, and the tiny, lightweight one might actually be better depending what it is, but clients aren't always necessarily looking at that. They're going to be looking at what looks the fanciest or the most impressive. So using a larger, heavier piece of adapted glass, especially EF lenses, is generally going to give you a more tactile manual response for your zooming and your focusing than a lighter weight, smaller native glass might.
Another advantage of the native lenses is going to be those electric contacts that are built specifically for the lens system. That means lenses with the electronic contacts like this 10-25 are going to have a lot of in-camera corrections, whereas the lenses from other manufacturers like Canon or Sigma won't. So distortion and vignetting are going to be corrected to some extent in the camera, even in video. And most of all, stuff like chromatic aberration with fast lenses like this 1.7 are gonna be pretty much non-existent because of, one, the lens design is really good on a lot of these, but anything that lens design can't fix, the software does. Another thing with the electronic contacts is if you've got something like this Leica 12-60, you're gonna get dual IS2, which means your shots are gonna be that much more steady. With adapted lenses, you're gonna have to choose between the IBIS in the camera or the lens stabilization, if the lens even has it. The last thing these electronic contacts can give you is autofocus. I mean, it's not great in video no matter what lens you use, but adapted lenses go from okay to pretty horrible, whereas the native lenses are always pretty good and sometimes even really good. Especially for photography, the contrast-based autofocus system is really quick, and there's a lot of stuff with adapted lenses that could go wrong or trip up the autofocus. So in general, Panasonic and even Olympus lenses are gonna focus and just work better with the camera right out of the box.
Now, one of the main reasons that I decided to adapt my GH5 to EF glass whenever I got the GH5 was the fact that I already had Canon lenses from my previous camera. So I already was using the Canon 24-105 lens, which has now become relatively my typical go-to lens on the GH5. So rather than spend extra money to be getting a whole new set of lenses, I decided to keep using the lenses I already had. In addition, a lot of the people that I work with also use EF glass, either on their mirrorless cameras that they've adapted or on their large cinema cameras that they're using on sets that typically are going to be using EF lenses or PL mount lenses. So I decided that the best option for me was to, one, keep using lenses I already had, and two, a lens system that I'm commonly around. So if I need to borrow lenses from a friend, or likewise, if someone needs to borrow lenses from me, that they are able to without us having to worry about having different lens systems. In fact, I am so invested in the EF mount system that even though I also shoot with the Sony FS5 Mark II, which is generally an E-mount camera, I also have adapted that to use EF glass, so that way my Panasonic or my Sony camera is still using the same lens mount system no matter what the needs of that job might be. So with the Canon EF mount system, you're buying into a very long-lasting and reliable lens system. EF lenses have been around since, if I'm recalling correctly, the late 80s, and they're still going strong today with more and more lenses coming out from multiple manufacturers every year. Another great thing is because EF lenses are so widely used, they retain resale value quite well. Some lenses, like the Sigma 18-35, are so popular that they barely lose any value at all when it comes time to resell them. So if later on in the future you're having to unload old glass for new lenses, or you're switching lens systems for some reason, then you're going to be able to make a decent amount of your money back on your EF glass.
Sure, there's tons of options for the EF mount, but there's just as many for Micro Four Thirds. It was developed by Olympus and Panasonic, and there's tons of awesome third-party options as well, like the Laowa we talked about earlier. I mean, I use an Olympus, a Panasonic Leica, and this Laowa as my main kit for 90% of my work. There's more than just them though. Voigtlander has an amazing set of lenses going from 10.5 all the way to 60 now. Sigma makes some really cheap fast primes for the system, and there's a ton of other third-party manufacturers making anamorphic lenses, super wide-angle lenses, and pretty much anything that you would need for this system. On top of the lens manufacturers, there's also a bunch of camera companies still making cameras for it. Even though Olympus is out of business, Panasonic's still here, and we've got Blackmagic and DZO? That's not right. Z-Cam.
So a quick note, whenever I'm talking about adapting lenses here, I am using a Metabones speedbooster. I'm using the XL, which is a 0.64 focal reducer and adds an extra stop of light. There's a lot of different speed boosters and adapters out there, including another options from Metabones and a popular one from Viltrox, but I personally use the Metabones XL. So while you're going to have an easier time getting wide angle shots with native lenses than you will with adapted lenses, due to the crop factor of using full frame or even APS-C lenses on your GH5 via an adapter, you're going to be able to get some longer telephoto shots. So especially if you already have a long zoom like this, it's going to give you an even further reach.
While the EF glass can tend to get you a little closer to your subject given the crop factor, Micro Four Thirds is, in my opinion, better at getting those super wide angle lenses. We've got this Laowa 7.5, which is a 15mm equivalent, which is hard to get using APS-C or full frame lenses adapted to the GH5. Another advantage is the zoom ranges are generally better. The Leica 10-25 has a better zoom range than the Sigma 18-35. My Leica 12-60 is effectively a 24-120, whereas the full frame Canon version is a 24-105.
So right now I'm holding the Leica 10-25 and the Sigma 18-35, which are going to be roughly comparable lenses for the sake of our comparison. The Leica is a 1.7 f-stop, while the Sigma is an f1.8. However, with the extra stop of light provided to me by my speed booster, the Sigma becomes an f1.2. So if I'm having to shoot in a low light situation, that extra stop will give me that much more of an advantage with the adapted glass than if I was using a native lens.
Of course you can get down to 1.2 on Micro Four Thirds, but it is definitely a little bit harder. You gotta get those Leica primes, you gotta get those Olympus primes, or you gotta get those Voigtlanders that go a little bit faster even, but still, those are primes. And the Sigma Speed Boosted is an f1.2 zoom, which is unheard of for native Micro Four Thirds lenses. So getting zoom lenses with apertures like f2, f1.2 is pretty important for some really low light situations. And of course it also helps for you bokeh fiends out there get that super shallow depth of field. In our test, the actual place that was the most noticeable was with the Sigma 70-200 being an f2 equivalent as opposed to the Olympus f2.8. I didn't think it would be that big of a difference, but it really was. In a total vacuum, if you just look at the performance and features, adapted EF glass versus native glass is pretty much trading blows when it comes to what is actually better. I think the EF lenses have just as many advantages as they do disadvantages, and same goes for Micro Four Thirds. All right guys, thanks for sticking with us. I know that was a lot of points here and there, but honestly, I think there's one really easy rule of thumb that you can follow when you're looking to get into the Micro Four Thirds lineup.
Basically, if you already have Canon EF glass, or you work around people who use a lot of Canon EF glass, then it's probably your best option to get an adapter or speed booster for your GH5. If not,
I think it definitely makes a lot of sense if you're coming straight into this camera system from not having any lenses, or if you are in it for the long haul when it comes to the Micro Four Thirds lineup from Panasonic and Olympus. The native lenses are just as good in most cases as the EF glass. They're about the same price or cheaper, they're about the same size or smaller, and in general, I think they're a little easier to use right out of the box if you're just starting out or if you just want the most streamlined experience with this camera. Anyway, I hope this helped, and I want to thank you guys for watching, and I want to thank Wyatt for coming on the channel here.
happy to be here. It's a good time.
Awesome, yeah, and if you guys want to see more of Wyatt, definitely leave it in the comments. He knows probably more than me, but he doesn't have a YouTube channel, so you're gonna have to be stuck with me unless he comes back. So definitely comment down below. If you made it this far, I assume you liked the video, so go ahead and show me by hitting the like button. It helps out a lot. And if you wanna see more videos with me or Wyatt, more videos on the GH5 and filmmaking, definitely subscribe to get notified when my new videos go live.